Hey, what's up, guys? It's Reed Young for TransformPoker.com. Got a pretty cool hand for you guys this time around. We're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be analyzing a heads-up hand between Tom Dwan and Victor Isildur Blom. So you guys can see they're playing 100-200, so it's a $20,000 buy-in game. They're playing heads-up. So the analysis we're going to do, not very exhaustive on metagame, but you can see the question posed here is how do we construct a river check calling range. And so we're just going to go through the action and get to the river. We'll talk about things, I guess, as they go. So pre-flop, the button, who is Tom Dwan, opens to 600, and it's a fairly standard size for how deep they are. Not much to comment on there. The big blind Isildur 3-bets to $2,000, and the button calls. So now between two aggressive heads-up players, ranges are still going to be pretty wide here on both sides of the action. I would say, you know, Victor is probably re-raising about 20% of hands here. If I had to put a number on it, roughly speaking, Dur is going to be defending with a very wide range as well, given the pot odds and the wide range he's up against. So not too much to say so far, but we'll get to breaking down the re-raising range a little bit later. So Victor continuation bets this ace-high flop a lot of the time, and he does it for just over half pot, which I think is a fine size. It sets up the action nicely while not risking too much if he wants to put in some larger bets on later streets, but also, you know, have some folding equity and not have to commit too much on the flop to get some folds out of hands like King 10 potentially. So the button calls, and we are off to the turn, which is the 10 of diamonds. It's kind of an interesting turn because a lot of Victor's range could pick up some equity. So there's a lot of hands like King Queen that he might continuation bet, or, you know, more likely hands like 9-8 of diamonds now pick up a monster draw, and he goes ahead and bets again, a little bit larger than the flop bet, and I think that's nice because it kind of reflects an adjustment for the draw-heavy texture of the board developing. So if he wants to semi-bluff wide here, in other words, with a lot of different hand combinations, he wants to bet a little bit larger to offer his opponent worse pot odds on a call. So that way, if Dur is sitting there with something like 7-8, he has a pretty tough decision now on the turn. So Dur calls again. The river is the 9 of hearts, and the question is, if Victor is to check call this river, what are the best hands to do it with? So the pot's already $20,000, and Dur has $16,500 behind. So about 3/4 of a pot size bet remaining should Victor choose to check. And optimally, and I would say most of the time, this will be the case because a different choice of bet size than all in would be fairly telling in some aspect of Dur's hand. Usually good players don't try to give their opponent an opportunity to outguess them because everyone's so good at guessing. So when Victor checks, he's expecting to face a bet of $16,500, if at all, into this $20,000 pot. What are the best hands to check here? The general rule of thumb for a check calling range on the river, so the action is over once this check call is made. You're not worried about future streets, so it's a bit different than check calling earlier streets. But on the river, you want to take a hand that is usually just below your value betting requirements, and that's because those hands are very likely to also block your opponent's value betting range. So what I mean by that is if you imagine Victor somehow having like ace-2 of spades that he bet on the turn and is now checking on the river, that hand blocks a lot of hands that are slightly better than ace-2, hands like ace-jack, ace-4, and things like that. So it's a nice hand to check because Dur might assume that his value betting range is actually balanced against his bluffs. Then if he does have a hand like 5-6 of diamonds, it's not necessarily properly balanced against his value betting range because he thinks his value betting range is actually a bit wider than it is for the spot. So another way to rephrase that is, if he's thinking like, oh, okay, I'm going to value bet all my hands ace jack and better, and I'm going to bluff with all my straight draws, say like all of his 5-6 combinations and the occasional 9-8 hand that gets a straight draw on the turn, maybe floated the flop with something like 9-8 of diamonds. It's a decent time to do it since he can't really represent too much air just by calling the flop. Anyway, there's a lot of ways he could get to the river with a bluff. That's not what we're concerned about. What we're mostly concerned about is how he's balancing those bluffs with his value bets. So facing a river check, if Tom goes ahead and tries to value bet all of his hands, say like the ace of spades, the jack of hearts being one hand, he thinks he has that in his range, but in reality Victor is checking, ace 2 of spades, for example, and he doesn't actually have ace jack with the ace of spades. So his value range is actually a lot thinner than he believes it to be, and this actually helps with the efficacy of a check call. So now the question is, does he do better value betting ace 2 or checking it? And because I don't think really a 7 is ever calling when ace 2 is value bet on the river, he probably does pretty well to check a lot of his weaker aces on the river. And this is what I was talking about at the beginning of the video when I was saying we're going to talk about the pre-flop ranges a little bit. So for Victor to have ace 2, that means he would be value betting a fairly strange range for how deep the stacks are. Now they're not especially deep, but a weak ace-x hand this deep stands to be called by a lot of better ace-x hands. And the problem of domination, especially out of position, is horrible for your reverse implied odds. It's going to mean when the money goes in, there's going to be very frequently a top pair versus top pair situation, and Victor's going to be on the wrong end of it. So you have to weigh that against the value of the pre-flop re-raise. And yeah, having an ace in your hand is nice because it blocks 4-bets and things like that. If Tom wants to 4-bet a hand like ace queen or ace king, but you do have to weigh that against the post-flop trouble of winning a large pot or losing a large pot. So even though it happens rarely, a small number times a gigantic number, which is the pot size when players are all in, can still be fairly significant and greater than the value of a successful pre-flop 3-bet with ace-x, as opposed to any other bluffing hand that does a bit better when called and isn't as dominated as often. So a hand like 6-8 suited might be better to 3-bet than ace 2. So those are things that Tom's going to have to figure out when Victor checks to him on the river. So also Victor's checking range might have to be comprised of more hands like king 10 or say like 7-8 of diamonds, because those hands do well enough to bet the turn. They have a lot of equity, so he's happy, well, not happy, but fine calling off a shove. But once he gets to the river, he can't really get any value from his pair, and he also blocks some hands that are pretty good in Tom's range that might try to value bet the river, again hurting the value betting frequency of Tom. So I would say that it's going to be fairly likely, if Victor's 3-betting a more polarized range deep and out of position, that he's going to have to check call hands like 7x in order to be unexploitable. And if he is 3-betting hands like ace 2 suited, that those would be the best hands to check call, just because they block the most of Tom's value range. So let me know what you guys think about this hand. If you want to see more of these like nosebleed high stakes review videos, definitely link me to a hand or let me know in the comment section. I'm happy to help, and share it with a poker buddy. Alright, I'll see you guys next time. Take care.